Have you ever wondered about the current economic situation in India and how it could potentially learn from Turkey's crisis? Let's take a step back and consider the Indian economy. It's a fascinating entity, a melange of growth, challenges and potential. With a large population and a significant youth demographic, India has the potential to be a global economic powerhouse. But the journey to such a stature isn't without its pitfalls and lessons. This is where the case of Turkey's economic crisis comes into play. Picture this: an economy once buzzing with promise, now faced with a significant currency devaluation, soaring inflation and political decisions that have left an indelible impact on its financial health. You see, the seeds of Turkey's economic issues were sown following the global economic crisis of 2001. The government took certain steps. They borrowed heavily, rolled out the red carpet for foreign investments, and put in place measures to develop infrastructure. Sounds like a solid plan, right? Well, not quite. As the years rolled by, the country saw a rising current account deficit and a depreciating currency. The culprit? An excessive reliance on imports and borrowing. What's more, in a bid to win elections, the government lowered interest rates, choosing to ignore the rising inflation. This short-term political gain led to a long-term economic pain, culminating in a severe economic crisis. So what can India learn from this? For starters, the importance of not relying solely on gross domestic product as an indicator of economic health. Factors such as the fiscal deficit, imports and exports also need to be taken into account. Moreover, India must prioritize long-term economic decisions over short-term political gains. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive deeper into Turkey's economic history. The year is 2001, and the world is in the grip of a global economic crisis. The tremors of this financial earthquake were felt far and wide, and Turkey was no exception. The country's economy was left reeling, a ship tossed on the stormy seas of global finance. The Turkish government, like a seasoned captain, quickly charted its course of action. Recognizing the need to stabilize the economy, it invited foreign investments, a beacon of opportunity in the midst of chaos. This move was akin to throwing a lifebuoy to a drowning man, providing the country with the much-needed financial support to navigate the turbulent waters. Next, the government turned its attention to infrastructure development. Like laying down a strong foundation before erecting a building, this step was crucial. Infrastructure is the backbone of any economy, and by focusing on its development, Turkey was aiming to strengthen its economic structure. It was a long-term vision, a strategy aimed at ensuring the country's growth and prosperity in the years to come. However, the government didn't stop there. It also took on debt, a risky yet necessary move. Borrowing money in times of crisis is like lighting a candle in the dark. It provides temporary relief, but if not handled carefully, it can lead to disaster. And so, the government had to tread carefully, balancing the immediate need for funds with the long-term implications of debt. But these immediate measures were just the beginning of a complex economic journey. Like a chess player contemplating his next move, the Turkish government had to consider the potential consequences of each decision. It had to weigh the benefits of short-term relief against the risks of long-term instability. And as we will see, this balancing act would prove to be a defining factor in Turkey's economic crisis. As the years rolled on, the cracks in Turkey's economy began to show. The once robust economic machinery began to falter, and the signs were there for all to see. Two major issues were at the heart of this economic unraveling. The first was a rising current account deficit. This deficit is essentially the difference between the value of goods and services a country exports and the value of what it imports. For Turkey, this gap was widening at an alarming rate. The country was importing far more than it was exporting, and this imbalance was putting a strain on the economy. The deficit was like a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode. The second issue was a depreciating currency. The Turkish lira was losing its value rapidly against other major currencies. This depreciation was a result of several factors, but one key factor stood out: excessive borrowing. Turkey had been borrowing heavily, both domestically and internationally, to fuel its economic growth. But this debt was proving to be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided the necessary resources for development, but on the other, it was leading to a devaluation of the currency. Now you may wonder, why was Turkey importing so much and borrowing excessively? Well, the answer to that lies in the country's ambitious growth strategy. The government was eager to stimulate the economy and achieve high growth rates. To do this, they encouraged imports of goods and machinery and took on debt to finance development projects. But what they didn't realize was that this approach was creating a fragile economy, an economy that was heavily dependent on external factors and vulnerable to shifts in the global economic landscape. And when these shifts happened, as they inevitably do, Turkey was left exposed. However, the government's response to these problems would only exacerbate the crisis. Instead of taking corrective measures to address the current account deficit and currency depreciation, they chose to double down on their failed policies. This decision would have far-reaching implications, pushing the Turkish economy to the brink of a severe crisis. In a surprising move, instead of raising interest rates to combat inflation, Turkey's government did the opposite. A decision, some might say, driven more by political ambition than economic prudence. In a bid to win the populace's favour and secure electoral victories, the government lowered interest rates. The immediate effect was a short-lived economic euphoria, a sugar rush of sorts that gave the illusion of prosperity. But this was merely the calm before the storm. As interest rates fell, borrowing became cheaper. The Turkish people, businesses and even the government began to borrow heavily, mostly in foreign currencies. The borrowed capital fueled consumption and imports, but did little to stimulate production or exports. This created a massive imbalance in the economy. The current account deficit widened and the Turkish lira began to depreciate, leading to a vicious cycle of economic instability. The real blow came when the foreign debt started maturing. With a depreciating currency, the cost of repaying these debts soared. Businesses defaulted, banks faced a liquidity crisis, and the government's coffers ran dry. The economic crisis had arrived in full force. The impact was devastating. Unemployment soared, businesses shuttered, and the Turkish lira lost a significant chunk of its value. The people of Turkey, who once enjoyed the illusion of prosperity, were now grappling with an economic nightmare. Prices of goods and services skyrocketed, making daily life a struggle for the common man. The Turkish economy, once a shining star, was now a cautionary tale. The government's decision to lower interest rates for short-term political gain led to a severe economic crisis that crippled the Turkish economy and impoverished its people. It was a clear case of political ambition overshadowing economic prudence, a mistake that came at a hefty price. With the Turkish economy in shambles, one can't help but wonder, what could have been done differently? The answer to that question, my friends, is a lesson for all nations, not just Turkey. It's a reminder that sound economic decisions should never be sacrificed for short-term political gains. As we look at Turkey's economic crisis, the question arises, what lessons can India learn from this scenario? Just as a ship uses a compass to navigate the turbulent seas, India can use Turkey's economic crisis as a guide to steer clear of similar pitfalls. There are several lessons that India can glean from Turkey's situation. Firstly, it's crucial to understand that economic health cannot be measured solely by gross domestic product or GDP. While GDP reflects the market value of all goods and services produced in a year, it doesn't account for factors such as fiscal deficit, imports and exports. These factors play a key role in a nation's economic stability. Turkey's crisis has shown us that a rising current account deficit and excessive borrowing can lead to a depreciating currency, causing economic instability. Secondly, India must remember that inviting foreign investments and developing infrastructure, as Turkey did, post the 2001 global economic crisis, are only parts of the solution. A balanced approach of internal growth and external investments is necessary. Relying heavily on foreign investments can make the economy vulnerable to global economic shifts. Thirdly, the temptation to make short-term political gains can lead to long-term economic harm. Turkey's decision to lower interest rates to win elections instead of raising them to combat inflation contributed significantly to their economic crisis. India must prioritize long-term economic decisions over short-term political gains. Finally, the importance of sound economic policies cannot be overstated. Economic policy is not just about numbers, it's about people's lives. Policies should be designed to promote growth, stability and prosperity for all, not just a select few. In conclusion, while Turkey's economic crisis is indeed a cautionary tale, it provides valuable lessons for nations like India. By considering factors beyond GDP, balancing internal growth with external investments, prioritizing long-term economic decisions, and implementing sound economic policies, India can avoid a similar fate. With these lessons in mind, India has the potential to navigate its economic future with caution and foresight.